You might be able to have a snack without playing video games, but you can't play video games without having a snack. It's like the most important rule after no camping and Call of Duty. So it only makes sense to combine food and video games. And no, not by leaving sticky Cheeto fingerprints all over the controller. We're talking about marketing, baby! Synergy! Today, we're dusting off the cartridge of a long-forgotten marketing fad to find out whatever happened to food tie-in video games. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other nerdy foodie history you would like to hear about. Okay, does everyone have their 2-liter of Mountain Dew? Good, let's press start. In 1977, American gaming company Atari put out the Atari 2600 gaming console for a shocking $199. Adjusted for inflation, that's around $1,000. Despite the cost and the fact that gaming was still a relatively niche hobby, the 2600 was a massive hit. By 1979, Atari had sold over 1 million consoles. And in 1982, it graced the homes of over 15 million families. With this kind of success, it didn't take long for other industries to take notice of the video game craze. Millions of eyes were glued to their chunky CRT TV sets, which presented a very interesting opportunity. Suddenly, the home console market was flooded with tie-in video games, and Atari was leading the charge. At the time, the primary demographic for video games was children, so many of the original tie-in games were promotions for other children's entertainment. This included TV shows, movies, and dental hygiene products, because every kid just needed to have that Johnson & Johnson branded mouthwash. And if their plates weren't full enough already, kids would also be served up a healthy portion of food and beverage tie-ins. 1983 saw the release of Kool-Aid Man for the Atari 2600 and in television. Originally, the game could only be acquired by mailing in proof of purchase seals from Kool-Aid packages, though it later became available at all major retailers. It was also terrible. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they busted through a marketing barrier and got the Kool-Aid name directly in front of kids. Coke even got in the action with a game called Pepsi Invaders, which was just a reskinned Space Invaders where you had to repel the oncoming Pepsi attackers. It wasn't widely released, but over 100 copies were handed out to their sales associates. As the 80s wound down, so did the popularity of the Atari 2600. Near the end of the decade, Nintendo was the new king of consoles, and their NES was selling like hotcakes. Also, it was selling hotcakes. In addition to now iconic franchises like The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros., Nintendo was peddling some strange food-related fare. It started in Japan with the release of 1988's Donaldland, which saw Ronald McDonald braving a world full of ferocious animals to save his mascot pals. It wasn't until 1990 that Americans finally got to play a food tie-in game on their NES. That game was Yo! Noid. Yo! Noid had players control Domino's Pizza's bizarre mascot, the Noid. As so many of these games were, Yo! Noid was based on a pre-existing game and slightly reprogrammed to better fit its branded tie-in. In this case, that pre-existing game was an action platformer called Kamen no Ninja Hanumaru. The noided-up version of the game saw the pizza mascot wield a yo-yo to defeat enemies and win pizza-eating contests in lieu of traditional boss battles. And as an added bonus, the game's manual included $1 off any Domino's pizza. After the release of Yo! Noid, the NES brought McDonald's back into the digital world. In 1992, they debuted MC Kids, which was basically a Super Mario Bros. Ripoff with McDonald's mascots and logos abound. They were even in the clouds. In the real world, Nintendo partnered with Ralston Cereals to create the Nintendo Cereal System. This bisected breakfast came with 2 distinct bags of cereal, each representing the Mario and Legend of Zelda franchises respectively. Sadly, the Nintendo Cereal System wasn't long for this world, being launched in 1998 and discontinued just 1 year later. But while Nintendo-branded cereal may have been a short-lived fad, food tie-in video games were alive and well. These were just the early adopters. In a few short years, gamers would be living in a video game food tie-in golden era. Golden Arches era, that is. In just a few short years, competition was ramping, and a whole new generation of home consoles was born. The NES made room for the Super NES in 1991, while Sega's Genesis was finally making ground thanks to the release of Sonic the Hedgehog, also in 1991. Cheetos was the next food brand to give this whole video game thing a try. Two platformers centered around their cool cat mascot were produced in rapid succession. Chester Cheetah, Too Cool to Fool, and Chester Cheetah Wild Wild Quest were released for the SNES and Genesis in 1992 and 1993. As it turned out, 93 would be a big year for food tie-ins. That year, Sega put out their own McDonald's video game. McDonald's Treasureland Adventure looked suspiciously like Sonic the Hedgehog, but the gameplay was wholly unique, with players taking Ronald all the way to space to fight aliens in pursuit of a treasure map. Also in 1993, the 7-Up tie-in Cool Spot was released for the SNES and Genesis. Cool Spot was yet another platforming game featuring a kid-friendly mascot. This time, players went around collecting spots and finding hidden letters that spelled out 7-Up's slogan at the time, Uncola. However, European countries were a little uncomfortable with this intensely kid-focused marketing and made some changes to their version of Cool Spot. All 7-Up branding was removed, and instead of spelling out Uncola, players were tasked with finding the word Virgin. Because the game was developed by Virgin Games USA. What were you thinking? By the mid-90s, yet another wave of consoles was hitting store shelves. The Nintendo 64, original PlayStation, and Sega Dreamcast were the new IT consoles to beat, and PC games were rolling out in droves as computers became more easily accessible. In 1996, Cool Spot got a sequel, Where He Went to Hollywood, and the beloved Chex Quest first-person shooter took over every kid's computer. Converted from the original Doom, Chex Quest was the first video game to come as a cereal box prize. It was so popular that it won awards for advertising effectiveness and promotional achievement, and spurred a whole trend of cereal box games. Many of these games weren't actually food tie-ins, but rather just video games that came with your cereal. However, there was the odd game made especially for a cereal brand, like Captain Crunch's Crunchling Adventure, in which players took care of a fuzzy little creature and fed it heaps of Captain Crunch cereal. The last food tie-in game of the era was PlayStation's Pepsi Man, which capped off the 90s in the strangest way imaginable. 1999's Pepsi Man was a 3D action game based on the titular Japanese mascot, a jack dude wearing nothing but some bling, a chrome face mask, and a skin-tight Pepsi suit. Or maybe that's his skin? Oh god. Pepsi Man was the most sophisticated food tie-in created at the time, with its 3D graphics and complex control system, but it wouldn't be the last, or the most horrifying. As the world entered into the new millennium, the relationship between gaming and food could only get stronger. Taco Bell put out a trio of PC games ripping off various popular genres at the time, from first-person shooters to brick breakers. And more tangible tie-ins were showing up in the real world, with McDonald's often offering video game-related Happy Meal toys. In 2006, Microsoft put out Sneak King for their new Xbox and Xbox 360 consoles. Sneak King was a fully 3D stealth game in which players controlled Burger King's royal mascot. The king tiptoed around various levels, delivering burgers to unsuspecting people across town. It was, in a word, horrific. It was also an effective marketing strategy, as the only way to get your hands on the game was to purchase a Burger King value meal. But the major breakout star of 2000's video game food tie-ins were Doritos and Mountain Dew. Both became synonymous with gaming through frequent partnerships. Call of Duty and Halo branding could often be found on bags of Doritos, while Mountain Dew had been putting Master Chief on cans and bottles for years. Doritos also put out a browser-based horror game called Hotel 626, but it's now considered lost media. Also around this time, Red Bull wanted in on the video game action, but they were going in a different, more competitive direction.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
Though eSports, or competitive gaming, has been around for decades, it wouldn't see mainstream success until the early 2010s. With the relationship between video games and food being well established, the next logical step was for certain food brands to sponsor esports tournaments. As the gaming market's demographic broadened to include teens and young adults, Red Bull became an early proponent of the movement, as well as the aforementioned Doritos and Mountain Dew. But soon, every company from Subway to Bush's Beans wanted to be part of the growing esports scene. Like other corporate sponsorships for more traditional sporting events, these brands launch tie products, plaster their logo on every available surface of the arena, and pitch in for cash prizes. Some games, particularly online ones, even incorporate company logos and live advertisements into the gameplay experience. Games like Counter-Strike, Dota, Fortnite, and League of Legends dominate the scene. In 2017, the League of Legends Championship was watched by nearly as many people as that year's Super Bowl. And in 2019, the eSports industry raked in over $1 billion in revenue. $456 million of that reportedly came from food and drink company sponsorships. Needless to say, there's more money than ever in the synergized partnership between gaming and food. But notably, these brands are no longer making their own video games. Instead, they're hitching rides on pre-existing titles with built-in fan bases. Today, we're seeing far fewer food tie-in video games. What was once a thriving cottage industry has been abandoned in favor of big esports sponsorships and the resurgence of real-world items like cereal boxes and chip bags. With the rise of esports and the increasing cost of video game development, it's much easier and more cost-effective for food companies to slap their logo on a costume or collectible than it is to commission an entirely new branded game. Then there's the video game industry itself, which has seen record numbers of layoffs over the past few years with no signs of slowing down. As such, game developers are taking fewer risks outside well-known gaming franchises. There's still the occasional outlier, like I Love You, Colonel Sanders, the 2019 KFC dating simulator that allows players to romance the Colonel. But these sorts of projects have become the exception rather than the rule. Unfortunately, this means all hopes of a horror game featuring the Pepsi Man and Burger King mascot have been dashed. But that's okay, they still show up in our nightmares. So what do you think? Do food tie-in video games deserve an extra life? Or is it game over for these cross-promotional products? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other Weird History Food videos.